Thanksgiving. A time for gratitude, for feasting, for the illusion of harmony. A table adorned with golden brown turkey, the warmth of family, and the echo of laughter masking deeper truths. But for some, it's a moment when the veneer of celebration shatters, exposing the raw edges beneath. Picture this: the scent of freshly baked pies mingling with the crisp air, the flicker of candlelight casting shadows, and then, a declaration, slicing through the joyous atmosphere. He thought he'd have the final word. He thought he could veil the truth in tradition. He didn't foresee the strength that would rise in response. The aroma of roasted turkey mingled with the scent of cinnamon and freshly baked pies, filling the warm, familiar air of our suburban home. The dining room was lively, a gentle hum of laughter and conversation weaving between the clinks of silverware and the soft rustle of napkins. Our long oak table was set meticulously, family heirlooms and autumnal decorations framing the scene. It was Thanksgiving, a day I had always treasured for its promise of togetherness. But this year, the promise felt fragile. Mark, my husband of 15 years, sat at the head of the table, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a quiet tension I hadn't seen before. Our two children, Ethan and Lily, were seated beside me, Ethan, 16 with his awkward teenage energy barely contained, and Lily, 10, her wide eyes darting between adults, sensing more than we were willing to admit. Across from Mark, his older brother Tom joined us, a man whose presence always brought a mix of comfort and subtle unease. Tom was the sort who spoke little but observed everything, his sharp eyes flickering over the table's occupants with a knowing look. I had spent the afternoon in the kitchen, preparing dishes that had become tradition: green bean casserole, mashed potatoes whipped to creamy perfection, and cranberry sauce that glistened ruby red. I had smiled and laughed, exchanging pleasantries with Tom as he helped Ethan set the table. Everything seemed normal, the kind of normal I had worked hard to maintain for the sake of my family. But as we gathered around the table, Mark's restless energy was impossible to ignore. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the wine glass, and when he finally raised it, the room fell quiet. I caught Ethan's uneasy glance and Lily's tentative grip on her napkin. "I have something I need to say," Mark began, his voice low but steady. The words that followed shattered the fragile calm like a sudden storm. "Julia, I want a divorce." The room froze. The laughter died instantly, swallowed by the weight of his declaration. I felt a stillness settle over me, a peculiar calm that belied the turmoil threatening to rise beneath my skin. Mark's eyes searched mine, perhaps looking for a reaction, for an argument, for anything that would delay the inevitable. Instead, I smiled. It was a quiet, serene smile, one that held years of unspoken truths and buried disappointments. "Thank you for your honesty, Mark," I said softly, my voice steady despite the shock rippling through me. The words hung in the air, a delicate balance between acceptance and quiet defiance. Ethan's face paled, and he looked to me, his confusion palpable. "Mom? Dad, are you serious?" he whispered, barely able to contain his disbelief. Lily's small hand found mine, her grip tightening as tears welled in her eyes. Mark's brother Tom shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his usual stoic expression faltering. I noted the flicker of sympathy in his eyes, but also the guarded distance that always kept him from fully engaging. I reached into my handbag, which I had placed on the floor beside my chair, and pulled out a small, neatly wrapped box. The movement seemed almost ritualistic, precise, as if I had rehearsed it in my mind countless times. I placed the box carefully in front of Mark, right beside his plate. "For you," I said quietly. "Something to consider." Mark's brow furrowed in confusion. He looked down at the box, then back at me, searching for an explanation that I did not offer. The room remained silent, the tension thick and suffocating. Without another word, I stood from my chair. I smiled once more, this time at Ethan and Lily, who stared at me with a mix of fear and hope. "Enjoy your meal, both of you," I said gently, brushing a stray lock of hair from Lily's forehead. Then, without waiting for a response, I excused myself and left the dining room. The hallway was cool against my skin, a sharp contrast to the heated emotions I had just left behind. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. For years, I had been the anchor of this family, the quiet force holding everything together while Mark's ambitions and restlessness pulled us in unpredictable directions. I had nurtured our children, supported his career, and maintained our home, often at the expense of my own dreams and desires. Yet, beneath my calm exterior, there was a simmering strength that few had seen. I was not the woman Mark thought I was, naive, compliant, and easily broken. I was ready to face the truth he had only now voiced, and ready to act on the knowledge I had been quietly gathering. The box I left him was only the beginning. Back in the dining room, the atmosphere remained charged. Ethan and Lily sat frozen, their plates untouched, while Tom's eyes lingered on Mark, who stared at the box with a mixture of confusion and unease. The silence was broken only by the faint ticking of the antique clock on the wall, each second stretching longer than the last. I walked to the small sitting room adjacent to the kitchen and sank into the armchair by the window. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the autumn breeze, their leaves a riot of gold and crimson. It was a scene of peace and renewal, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside our home. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick message to my sister, Sarah, letting her know what had just transpired. I wasn't ready to talk yet, not here, not now, but I needed the knowledge that someone was on my side. Minutes later, a text notification arrived. "I'm here whenever you need. Stay strong, Julia." I smiled faintly, the smallest flicker of hope piercing the haze of confusion. This was the moment our lives changed, the first step down a path I had never anticipated but now embraced with quiet determination. Mark had spoken the words, but I would decide what came next. The Thanksgiving feast, once a symbol of family unity, had become the backdrop for a fracture I could no longer ignore. I was ready to face whatever lay ahead, for myself and for my children. And so, as the house settled into an uneasy silence, I sat back and let the weight of the moment settle, knowing that the real journey was only just beginning. The house was quiet now, save for the soft ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the heating system. I sat alone in the sitting room, the weight of Mark's words still settling like an unwelcome shadow. Divorce. The word echoed in my mind, reverberating against memories and moments I had long treasured. 15 years. 2 children. A life carefully woven together with sacrifices, hopes, and dreams. And now, it was all unraveling. I thought back to the early days, how Mark and I met in college, young and full of idealism. We had built something solid, or so I believed. I had put my law career on hold when Ethan was born, then again when Lily arrived, choosing to prioritize their upbringing over my ambitions. Mark's career had always been the focus, his relentless drive a double-edged sword that brought us financial security but often left emotional gaps. I had accepted the long hours, the missed dinners, the silent nights when he was physically present but emotionally distant. In recent months, the distance had grown more palpable. Mark had become more secretive, slipping away on vague business trips, his phone always just out of reach. I had noticed the hushed conversations, the sudden silences when I entered a room. But I had chosen to trust, to believe that the stresses of work were the cause, not suspecting the truth lurking beneath the surface. Now, as I sat quietly, I acknowledged the strength I had always carried beneath my calm exterior. It was a strength forged in the fires of motherhood, in the quiet perseverance of daily life, in the necessity of being a steady presence for Ethan and Lily even when I felt broken inside. I was more than a wife, I was their protector, their guide, and I would not crumble. The small wrapped box I had placed beside Mark's plate was more than a gesture, it was a symbol of the control I intended to reclaim. I had spent weeks compiling evidence, piecing together the puzzle of Mark's recent actions, his financial decisions, and the secrets he thought I wouldn't uncover. The truth was a weapon, and I was prepared to wield it. I thought of Ethan and Lily, their innocent faces etched with confusion and fear. They deserved honesty, but only at the right time and in the right way. I would shield them as long as I could, providing the stability they needed even as the foundations beneath us shifted. A flicker of determination ignited within me. I would not be a passive victim in this story. I had learned to be composed in the face of adversity, to think strategically when emotions threatened to overwhelm. This was my moment to step out of the shadows, to embrace the power I had kept hidden for too long. The house was no longer just a home, it was a battleground, and I was ready to fight, not with anger or bitterness, but with clarity and resolve. Mark's announcement had shattered the illusion of our perfect life, but from the fragments, I would build something new. I rose from the armchair and moved to the window, watching the autumn leaves swirl in the breeze. Change was inevitable, and sometimes it came wrapped in pain. But pain could be transformed into strength. I had learned this in the quiet moments of motherhood, in the late nights when worries kept me awake, and in the countless small decisions that had shaped who I was. I thought about the conversations I would soon need to have, with Mark, with lawyers, with friends and family. I was ready to face them all with the same calm I had displayed tonight, a calm that masked the storm beneath but never let it consume me. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to define. I would navigate this new reality with grace and determination, for myself and for the children who depended on me. The journey ahead would be difficult, but I was not alone. I had my own strength, my family's support, and a clear vision of what I deserved. As the evening deepened into night, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The woman who sat by the window was not the same woman who had entered that dining room an hour ago. She was someone reborn from the ashes of betrayal, someone ready to reclaim her life. Mark's words had been a shock, but they were not the end. They were a beginning, a call to action that I was now answering with unwavering resolve. The path ahead would be challenging, but I would walk it with my head held high, knowing that beneath the calm lay a fierce and unbreakable spirit. The dining room felt like a stage where every movement was magnified, every glance scrutinized. I returned quietly from the sitting room, the small wrapped box still resting beside Mark's plate, an unspoken challenge lingering in the air between us. The family's chatter had dwindled to uneasy silence, the children's wide eyes flickering between Mark and me, sensing the shift but unable to comprehend its full weight. I reached out and gently touched Mark's hand, steady and deliberate. His fingers twitched beneath my touch, a flicker of surprise, and perhaps regret, passing through his eyes. The room seemed to hold its breath as I calmly, almost ritualistically, handed him a small, elegantly wrapped box. It was simple, unassuming, yet heavy with meaning. "For you," I said softly, my voice measured and composed. I watched as his brow furrowed in confusion, the tension in his jaw tightening as he lifted the box, turning it over in his hands. "It's something I want you to have," I added. "Take your time with it." Mark's lips parted, as though to speak, then closed again. His eyes darted toward Tom, who sat stiffly at the table, his expression unreadable but alert. Ethan shifted in his chair, the restless energy of a teenager caught in the middle of a family storm. Lily clung to my arm, her small fingers trembling slightly. I could feel the weight of every gaze on me. The room had transformed from a place of warmth and tradition to a crucible of unspoken emotions and hidden agendas. Yet through it all, I maintained my composure, the calm eye of the hurricane. Without another word, I rose from my seat. The familiar wooden chair scraped softly against the floor as I moved toward the doorway. I paused briefly, glancing back at the family one last time. "Enjoy your meal," I said gently, a hint of kindness threading through my words. "I'll be in the kitchen if you need me." The soft click of the door closing behind me sealed the moment. Outside the dining room, the kitchen was a sanctuary of order and routine. The gleaming countertops, the neatly stacked dishes, the faint scent of rosemary and sage, all reminders of the life I had built, the life now fracturing before my eyes. I leaned against the counter, closing my eyes for a moment. The composed facade I wore was not an act but a shield, forged from years of navigating challenges and sacrifices. I knew Mark's announcement was only the beginning. The box I had handed him was a calculated move, carefully timed and meticulously prepared. Inside that small package was more than a gift, it was a key. A key to truths he had tried to hide, to evidence I had gathered in quiet moments, piecing together the fragments of his secret life. It was a message. I was no longer the passive partner waiting for answers. I was in control. The silence of the kitchen was broken by the distant sounds of the dining room, the clatter of utensils, the low murmur of voices cautiously resuming. But I remained still, savoring the moment of calm before the inevitable storm. I thought of Ethan and Lily, their innocent faces etched with confusion and fear. They had watched their parents, once united and strong, falter under the weight of unspoken truths. I would protect them from the worst of it, shielding their childhood as best I could. But I would also prepare them for the changes to come, teaching them resilience and honesty. A soft knock at the kitchen door startled me. It was Tom, Mark's brother. His usual reticence was replaced by a cautious concern. "Julia," he said quietly, "if you need anything, let me know." I nodded, grateful for the unexpected ally. He lingered a moment longer, his eyes flicking toward the dining room as if weighing his loyalties. Then he slipped away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I turned back to the countertop, fingers tracing the edge of the box I had just handed to Mark. It was wrapped in simple brown paper, tied with a thin ribbon, nothing extravagant, but deliberate. Inside was a USB drive containing detailed records, bank statements, emails, and messages that laid bare Mark's financial mismanagement and hidden debts. Weeks of quiet investigation had led to this moment. Late nights poring over documents, discreet phone calls to lawyers, and the careful collection of evidence had prepared me for the confrontation Mark had forced upon us all tonight. The box was the opening gambit in a strategy designed to protect my children, secure my future, and reclaim the life I deserved. I allowed myself a brief smile, quiet, resolute. The control I had felt slipping away was now firmly within my grasp. I was no longer the woman who silently endured, I was the woman who planned, who acted, who fought. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking the passage of time as I steeled myself for the conversations ahead. Mark would open the box eventually. He would see the truth laid bare, and with it, the consequences of his choices. For now, I would remain composed, the calm center of a family on the brink of upheaval. I would be the steady hand for Ethan and Lily, the voice of reason and love in a moment of chaos. As the evening deepened, I prepared to face whatever came next, knowing that this quiet gesture, this simple box, was the first step in a journey toward clarity, justice, and ultimately, healing. Mark sat at the dining table, the small, unassuming box resting beside his untouched plate. His fingers hovered over it, hesitant, as if sensing the weight of what lay within. I knew he was curious, perhaps anxious, but I had no intention of rushing him. This was his moment to confront the reality I had quietly been gathering for weeks. Later that evening, after the children had gone to bed and the house had settled into an uneasy quiet, Mark finally opened the box. I was in the living room, pretending to read a book, but my eyes kept drifting toward the dining room doorway. The soft rustle of paper and the faint click of the box's lid breaking open were unmistakable. He pulled out a USB drive, sleek and simple, its presence almost mundane against the elegant wrapping it had come in. Mark's brow furrowed as he plugged it into his laptop, the screen flickering to life. What he saw next would change everything. The files I had compiled were detailed and meticulous, bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, emails revealing hidden accounts, and spreadsheets outlining debts he had kept secret from me. There were records of late-night transactions, money funneled into accounts I never knew existed, and notes from phone calls that confirmed his financial mismanagement. Each document was a thread in a web of deception he had spun over the past year. I had uncovered it all quietly, piecing together the truth without alerting him to my suspicions. It had taken patience and discretion, scouring our joint accounts, monitoring credit reports, and even discreetly consulting with a trusted financial advisor who had helped me understand the extent of the damage. The evidence was undeniable. Mark's financial decisions had put us at risk, draining savings meant for our children's education and our retirement. The trust one had placed in him was shattered, replaced by a cold clarity that demanded action. I watched from the living room as Mark's face changed, confusion giving way to realization, then to frustration. He closed the laptop abruptly, the quiet click echoing through the house. I knew he was processing more than just numbers, he was confronting the consequences of his choices and the inevitability of the path we were now on. That night, I lay awake thinking about the future. The box had been my opening move, a way to protect myself and our children from the fallout of Mark's recklessness. I had carefully documented everything not out of spite, but out of necessity. Our family's security was at stake, and I was determined to safeguard it. I had also sought legal counsel in secret, speaking with a family lawyer who specialized in financial disputes and custody arrangements. The lawyer had advised me on the importance of thorough documentation and had helped me understand my rights and options. It was a stark contrast to the life I had imagined, but I was prepared to navigate it with the same quiet strength I had shown throughout our marriage. In the days that followed, I maintained my composure, continuing to support the children and manage the household with steady hands. Ethan and Lily needed normalcy, even as the storm brewed beneath the surface. I shielded them from the details, offering only reassurance and love. Mark, meanwhile, became increasingly withdrawn, his frustration palpable yet restrained. He avoided direct conversation, perhaps hoping the evidence would disappear or that I would relent. But I was resolute. The box was not just a container of files, it was a statement that I would no longer be kept in the dark. One afternoon, as I prepared dinner, Mark finally confronted me. His voice was low, tinged with anger and regret. "Why did you do this? Why collect all this information behind my back?" I met his gaze steadily, refusing to be drawn into blame or denial. "Because I needed to know the truth," I said calmly. "Because our family deserves honesty and security. I had to protect Ethan and Lily, and myself." He looked away, the weight of his actions settling over him. The man I had loved was still there, but fractured by choices that had eroded our foundation. As the weeks passed, I began to understand the depth of the betrayal, but also the opportunity it presented. The evidence I held was a tool, not for vengeance, but for fairness. It allowed me to approach the difficult negotiations ahead from a position of strength, ensuring that my children's future would not be compromised. In the quiet moments, I allowed myself to imagine a new life, one where I could reclaim my independence and rebuild trust, starting with myself. The journey would be difficult, but the clarity I had gained gave me a sense of control I had not felt in years. The box, simple and unassuming, had become the catalyst for change. It was the first tangible step toward a future defined not by betrayal, but by resilience and hope. And as I faced the uncertain days ahead, I knew I would carry that strength with me, unwavering and true. Nights had become my clandestine workspace, the hours when the house was finally still and the world outside quiet enough to hear my own thoughts clearly. I sat at the dining table long after Ethan and Lily had gone to bed, poring over bank statements, emails, and credit reports. It was painstaking work, but necessary. Each piece of information was a puzzle fragment, and I was determined to see the whole picture. Mark's financial footprint was everywhere, but hidden beneath layers of complexity. He had opened secret credit cards, taken out unauthorized loans, and siphoned money into accounts under assumed names. The sums were significant, far beyond what I had imagined when the first suspicions crept into my mind. I carefully downloaded statements from our joint accounts, cross-referencing each transaction with the dates Mark claimed to be on business trips. Late-night transfers, unexplained withdrawals, payments to unknown entities, all signs of a web of deceit he had spun with alarming ease. There were emails too, some curt, some detailed, between Mark and financial advisors, discussing strategies to conceal debts and divert funds without raising suspicion. I saved every message, every attachment, knowing that these digital breadcrumbs would be vital in any legal proceedings. Despite the emotional toll, I reminded myself why I was doing this. It wasn't just about uncovering betrayal, it was about protecting the future of our children and ensuring that I wasn't blindsided again. I had to be prepared, armed with facts and evidence, not just hurt and suspicion. To navigate this labyrinth, I reached out to a trusted family lawyer who specialized in divorce and financial disputes. I had chosen her after discreet recommendations from friends, someone known for her empathy and sharp legal mind. Our meetings were held in quiet offices, away from prying eyes, where I could speak freely without fear of judgment or exposure. She listened intently as I laid out the evidence I had collected, nodding thoughtfully. "You've done an impressive job building your case," she said. "This level of documentation is crucial. It gives you leverage and control." Together, we crafted a strategy, not just to protect my financial interests but also to safeguard custody arrangements for Ethan and Lily. The lawyer emphasized the importance of clear communication and the need to remain calm and composed during negotiations. Emotions will run high, she warned, but your strength will come from your preparation. I left those meetings feeling both empowered and vulnerable. Empowered because I had a plan, vulnerable because the reality of what lay ahead was daunting. Divorce was no longer a distant possibility, it was imminent, and it came with battles that stretched far beyond the confines of our home. At night, when the house breathed quietly around me, I often thought about the children. Ethan, with his quiet resilience, and Lily, whose innocence still shone brightly despite the shadows gathering around us. I knew they deserved a future unmarred by conflict and instability, and I vowed to shield them as best I could. During the day, I maintained the routine: school runs, homework, family dinners, holding the pieces together with practiced grace. I answered Ethan's questions with gentle honesty, careful to avoid unnecessary details, and comforted Lily with bedtime stories that painted a world safe from harm. Mark's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He oscillated between avoidance and confrontation, sometimes distant, other times sharply defensive. I kept our interactions focused and direct, refusing to be drawn into arguments or distractions. One afternoon, as we sat in the living room discussing weekend plans, Mark's frustration boiled over. "You're building a case against me," he accused, voice low but edged with bitterness. "What do you want from me, Julia?" I met his gaze steadily. "I want honesty. I want fairness. And most of all, I want to protect our children. That's all." He looked away, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. It was a small victory but a meaningful one. I had set boundaries without igniting a flame. The days blurred into weeks as I balanced the demands of motherhood, the complexities of our unraveling marriage, and the meticulous work of preparing for what was to come. The evidence I had gathered was my shield and my sword, silent but powerful. In quiet moments, I began to imagine life beyond this crisis, a life where I could reclaim my identity and independence. I thought about returning to work part-time, perhaps starting a small business that aligned with my skills and passions. The idea of financial autonomy was both thrilling and daunting, but I was ready to explore it. As autumn deepened, the leaves outside turned fiery shades of orange and red, mirroring the tumult within my heart. Change was inevitable, and I was learning to embrace it, not as a victim, but as a woman rediscovering her strength. Each document, each email, each whispered conversation with my lawyer was a step toward reclaiming control. I was no longer the quiet partner swept aside by Mark's decisions. I was a force to be reckoned with, determined to secure a future where Ethan and Lily could thrive, and where I could stand tall on my own. And so, as the days grew shorter and the nights colder, I continued my quiet work, building a foundation not just for survival, but for renewal. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to face it with clear eyes and a steady heart. The front door slammed open late one evening, the sudden noise jolting me from the quiet of the living room where I'd been reviewing documents. Mark stood there, his face tense and flushed, eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and desperation. He didn't bother to greet me. Instead, he stormed toward the dining room table where the USB drive still lay beside an untouched cup of coffee. "I've gone through everything," he said sharply, voice low but trembling. "What the hell is this, Julia? Why did you collect all this evidence without telling me?" I remained seated, calm and steady, my hands folded in my lap as I met his gaze. "Because I needed to know the truth, Mark. Because our family deserves honesty. Because I had to protect myself and the children." He paced the length of the room, fists clenched at his sides. "You're treating this like a trial. Like I'm some criminal." His voice cracked with frustration. "You've made choices, financial decisions, that have put us at risk," I said quietly, my tone firm but not unkind. "I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to make sure we move forward with clarity and fairness." Mark's eyes flickered with a flicker of regret, but the anger quickly resurfaced. "Fairness? You're gathering evidence to use against me. Against us." "Against you, yes," I replied. "Because you hid the truth. Because you lied about our finances and jeopardized our future. I gave you a chance to be honest, and you chose secrecy. He stopped pacing and stared at me, the fight draining from his posture. For a moment, the man I had known, the man I had loved, seemed to emerge from beneath the layers of anger and betrayal. But the damage was done, and the path ahead was irrevocably changed. I never wanted it to come to this, he said softly, almost a whisper. I thought I could fix things before you found out. I wanted to believe that too, I admitted, feeling a pang of sadness. But hiding the truth only made it worse. Now we have to face it together, even if that means apart. Mark sank into a chair, head in hands. The weight of the situation pressed down on us both, the silence stretching between words unspoken. I reached out, placing a tentative hand on his shoulder, not in forgiveness, but in acknowledgement of the shared pain. I want you to know this isn't easy for me, I said. I'm not here to destroy our family. I want what's best for Ethan and Lily, and for that, we need honesty and respect. He looked up, eyes red-rimmed. I'm sorry, Julia. I didn't mean to hurt you or the kids. I know, I said softly. But sorry isn't enough. Actions have consequences, and we need to be accountable. That night marked a turning point. The confrontation was painful but necessary, a moment where the veils of secrecy were torn away, revealing raw truths beneath. Mark's demeanor shifted from defiance to a reluctant acceptance, the realization dawning that his choices had irrevocably altered the course of our lives. In the days that followed, our interactions were cautious but more open. Mark began to acknowledge the evidence and the implications it carried. Though his frustration lingered, he no longer denied the facts laid before him. I continued to stand firm, balancing compassion with resolve. The foundation of our fractured relationship was fragile, but I was determined to build it on honesty and mutual respect, especially for the sake of our children. Ethan and Lily remained unaware of the full extent of the conflict, shielded as best I could. Their lives continued with a semblance of normalcy, punctuated by moments of tenderness amidst the uncertainty. Mark and I discussed next steps with our lawyer, navigating the legal complexities with careful attention. The path ahead was daunting, but the confrontation had cleared the air, allowing us to move forward with clearer expectations. As I reflected on those difficult days, I recognized the strength that had carried me through, the quiet resilience that had been there all along, now fully awakened. The road was far from easy, but for the first time, I felt the possibility of renewal amid the ruins. The next morning, I found myself sitting across from my sister Sarah at our favorite cafe, the comforting aroma of fresh coffee mingling with the quiet murmur of early patrons. I had reached out to her the night before, the weight of recent confrontations pressing heavily on my chest, and she had insisted we meet as soon as possible. Sarah's eyes were soft but steady as I recounted the events, the announcement, the evidence, the tense confrontation with Mark. I spoke carefully, choosing my words with the precision born from weeks of careful reflection. I didn't want to overwhelm her or invite pity, only to find a steady anchor in the storm. You've been so strong through all of this, Sarah said gently, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. But you don't have to carry it alone. We're family. I'm here for you. Her support was a balm I hadn't realized I needed. In that moment, I allowed myself a brief release of the tight control I had maintained. Tears welled up, but I blinked them away, determined to remain composed, for the children, for Mark, and most of all for myself. Later that day, I sat with Ethan and Lily in the living room, the golden afternoon light filtering through the windows. They were too young to understand everything, but they sensed the tension that had settled over the house like an unwelcome guest. Ethan was quiet, his usual teenage restlessness subdued. Lily clung to my side, her small fingers entwined with mine. I chose my words carefully, offering reassurance without divulging unnecessary details. This is a tough time for all of us, I said softly. But no matter what happens, I want you both to know that I love you, and I will always be here for you. Ethan nodded, his eyes thoughtful. Will everything be okay, Mom? I smiled, drawing him into a gentle hug. We'll get through this together. We're a family, and families stick together. The children's trust became my compass, guiding each decision I made as I navigated the complexities of our unraveling family life. Meanwhile, tensions within the extended family began to surface. Mark's older brother, Tom, had always been a quiet observer, but now he made his position clear. I received a call one afternoon, his voice measured but firm. "Julia, I want you to know I'm on your side," he said. "What Mark has done isn't right, and I'll support you however I can." His unexpected allegiance brought both relief and unease. Family dynamics were shifting, alliances forming and fracturing under the strain of betrayal. Tom's support was a welcome reinforcement, but it also deepened the rift between him and Mark, adding another layer of complexity to an already fraught situation. As the days passed, I found myself drawing strength from these connections: Sarah's unwavering presence, Tom's quiet support, and the resilience of my children. They reminded me that I was not alone, even when it felt like the world was closing in. Yet, beneath the surface, I grappled with the emotional toll of rebuilding trust and redefining what family meant in this new reality. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with difficult conversations, but I was determined to face it with honesty and grace. One evening, after putting the children to bed, I sat with Sarah on the couch, the weight of the day settling between us. "Whatever happens," she said, "remember that you're stronger than you think. This isn't just an ending, it's a chance to start over." Her words resonated deeply. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to envision a future not defined by betrayal, but by resilience and renewal. The family I once knew was changing, but it was not disappearing. It was evolving, fragile, yes, but with the potential to become something new, shaped by truth and the unbreakable bonds of love and support. And as I looked around at the life I was determined to protect and rebuild, I realized that while the journey ahead would be challenging, I was ready to face it, not alone, but surrounded by those who believed in me. The mediation room was sterile and impersonal, a far cry from the warmth of the home we had once shared. A long oval table dominated the center, surrounded by stiff chairs and the muted colors of beige walls. Our lawyers sat at opposite ends, their expressions professional, eyes sharp and alert. Mark and I faced each other across the table, the space between us charged with unspoken tension. The mediator, a woman with a calm demeanor and a voice that commanded attention without raising volume, opened the session with a measured welcome. "Thank you both for being here. Our goal is to find common ground and work toward a resolution that respects everyone's interests, especially the children's." I nodded, swallowing the lump of nerves that had settled in my throat. This was the first step in what promised to be a long and emotionally taxing process. Mark's lawyer began by presenting the usual defenses: claims of misunderstandings, attempts to downplay the severity of the financial discrepancies I had uncovered. But I was prepared. The evidence I had gathered was comprehensive and irrefutable. Bank statements, emails, credit reports, all laid out with meticulous detail. As the mediator guided us through the agenda, Mark's frustration became increasingly apparent. His responses grew terse, his body language closed off. Yet, beneath the surface, I sensed a reluctant acknowledgement of the facts he could no longer deny. When it came to custody discussions, the room grew heavier. Mark's tone softened, revealing a genuine concern for Ethan and Lily's well-being, despite the fractures in our relationship. I mirrored his sentiment, emphasizing stability and open communication for the children's sake. Throughout the session, I maintained a composed and clear demeanor, speaking deliberately and calmly. I focused on the facts, avoiding emotional outbursts that might derail the progress. It was a stark contrast to the turmoil that had filled our home in recent weeks. The mediator praised our willingness to engage, though she warned that the path ahead would require patience and compromise. Divorce is rarely simple, but with mutual respect and clear communication, it can be navigated with dignity. Mark's frustration was palpable, yet I sensed a shift, a grudging acceptance that the foundation of our marriage had been irrevocably altered, and that rebuilding trust would require honesty and accountability. As the session concluded, we tentatively agreed on several preliminary arrangements: freezing joint accounts, setting temporary custody schedules, and beginning the process of equitable financial division. It was far from a resolution, but it was a start. Walking out of the courthouse later, the crisp autumn air felt like a breath of fresh possibility. The legal battle was underway, but so was my journey toward reclaiming control over my life and future. I thought about Ethan and Lily, their innocent faces etched with uncertainty but also resilience. This process was for them as much as it was for me and Mark. I vowed to protect their sense of security and love throughout the upheaval. In the days that followed, I began to lay the groundwork for the next chapter, exploring part-time work opportunities, seeking support networks, and strengthening the circle of family and friends who had become my pillars. Mark and I exchanged few words outside of legal necessities, the distance between us both physical and emotional. Yet, beneath the surface, the shared goal of co-parenting kept us tethered. I was learning that strength was not just about endurance but also about adaptability, about finding grace amid chaos and forging new foundations where old ones had crumbled. The mediation session was a difficult but necessary milestone, a reminder that while endings are painful, they also open the door to new beginnings. And as I stepped forward into the unknown, I carried with me a quiet confidence born of preparation, clarity, and the unwavering love for my children. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the curtains as I sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, juggling invoices and emails for the small consulting business I had recently launched from home. It was a modest start, but every step toward financial independence felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been lost amidst years of compromise and upheaval. After the turmoil of mediation and legal negotiations, I knew I needed something tangible to anchor me, a way to rebuild not just my finances but my identity. Drawing on my background in finance and years of managing our household budget, I began offering personalized financial guidance to women navigating life transitions. The work was rewarding, a chance to transform my own painful experience into purpose and empowerment for others. Balancing this new venture with motherhood was a delicate dance. Ethan, now more reserved but steadily finding his own path, adjusted with a maturity beyond his years. Lily, still young and bright, sought comfort in routines and whispered reassurances. I made it my mission to provide stability in the midst of change, a safe harbor as we all adapted to our new reality. Mark's presence in the house had diminished, the distance between us both physical and emotional. He struggled to accept the consequences of his actions, his frustration often palpable. Yet, despite the tension, we maintained a fragile civility, especially in front of the children. Co-parenting required cooperation, and though it was far from easy, I was determined to rise above resentment for their sake. One afternoon, Ethan sat beside me as I reviewed some client notes. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm proud of what you're doing. Seeing you work like this, it makes me feel like everything's going to be okay." His words struck a chord deep within me. In the midst of uncertainty, there was hope, a belief that we could heal and grow stronger. I reached out, ruffling his hair gently. "Thank you, Ethan. That means more than you know." The journey wasn't without setbacks. There were days when self-doubt crept in, when the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming. But with each challenge, I felt my resilience deepen. I was learning to navigate this new chapter with grace and determination. Social circles shifted as well. Friends who once took sides began to distance themselves from Mark as the truth of his actions became widely known. For me, this was bittersweet, loss mingled with relief. I focused on nurturing relationships that uplifted me, surrounding myself with those who believed in my strength and vision. In quiet moments, I reflected on how far I had come, from the stunned wife at that Thanksgiving dinner to a woman forging a path of her own. The small business was more than a livelihood, it was a symbol of rebirth. As autumn gave way to winter, I found myself embracing the change. The hard work, the late nights, the emotional roller coaster, it was all part of a transformation. I was no longer defined solely by my past or my marriage but by the choices I made moving forward. There was still healing to be done, conversations to navigate, and boundaries to set. But with each step, I reclaimed my voice, my power, and my sense of self. And through it all, I held on to the unwavering love for Ethan and Lily, the true anchors in my life, inspiring me to keep moving forward, no matter the obstacles. The final hearing was scheduled on a crisp winter morning, the courthouse standing solemn and imposing against the pale sky. I arrived early, dressed in a tailored suit that symbolized the professionalism and strength I had cultivated over the past months. The journey from that Thanksgiving dinner announcement to this moment had been a trial of endurance, but today marked the culmination of my efforts to reclaim my life. Mark was already seated, his face a mixture of resignation and lingering bitterness. The courtroom was filled with familiar faces, our lawyers, the mediator who had guided us through earlier sessions, and a handful of family members who had followed the proceedings with quiet interest. Ethan and Lily sat beside me, their expressions serious but trusting. They had been my motivation throughout this ordeal. As the judge reviewed the case file, I felt a steady calm wash over me. The evidence was clear: financial mismanagement, broken trust, and the careful documentation I had presented left little room for dispute. The prenuptial agreement, which Mark had insisted upon years ago, contained a fidelity clause that now played a pivotal role in the proceedings. When the judge addressed us, his voice was firm but fair. After careful consideration of all evidence and testimony, the court finds in favor of Ms. Thompson's claims. The financial arrangements will be adjusted accordingly, and custody agreements will reflect the best interests of the children. Mark's face drained of color, the reality of the consequences settling heavily upon him. I observed quietly, neither gloating nor relenting, simply acknowledging the justice that had finally been served. The process had been arduous, months of negotiations, legal battles, and emotional upheaval, but the outcome affirmed my resolve. I had not only protected my children and secured my financial future but also reclaimed my identity beyond the confines of a fractured marriage. Friends who had distanced themselves from Mark over the past months now reached out to offer support. I found a renewed sense of community among those who championed my strength and vision. It was a reminder that betrayal, while painful, could lead to unexpected solidarity and growth. In the weeks following the hearing, I focused on healing and rebuilding. My consulting business flourished gradually, fueled by a passion born from personal experience. Each success was a testament to resilience and the power of transformation. Ethan and Lily adapted to our new life with remarkable grace. Their smiles returned, laughter filled the rooms once more, and the weight of uncertainty began to lift. I made sure they knew they were loved unconditionally, that our family, though changed, remained strong. Mark attempted to reconcile, reaching out with hesitant apologies and offers to amend his ways. I listened but maintained firm boundaries, aware that forgiveness did not equate to forgetting, and that my priority was the well-being of our children and myself. Standing in the kitchen one evening, watching Ethan and Lily play together, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had been painful, but it had also been transformative. The envelope I had once handed Mark was not merely a symbol of retribution, it was the key to my reinvention. I had rebuilt my life on foundations of honesty, strength, and self-respect. I was no longer defined by past betrayals but by the courage to forge a new path. And as the sun set beyond the window, casting a warm glow over the home I had fought to protect, I knew that this chapter was just the beginning of a future shaped by hope, resilience, and the unyielding love of a mother determined to thrive. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.